What's good people, welcome back to our channel. Today we're doing another exciting deck profile, but this time for the premium format, which is a format we really haven't made videos on yet, so I think this might be exciting. As you might have seen on one of our previous videos, we opened some boxes of the history collection, and this set really changed the way premium is being played right now. So this will be a deck profile for Altmile, but before we get into it, I like to add a little bit of background information. I've used this deck at the shop challenge the 26th of August, so I don't know when this video will go up, so that might be relevant to know when this deck was being used. And I managed to get into the finals, into the top cut, to the final round, but it's sadly bricked, and I think I'll be able to show you why I bricked later on in the video. But I'm really excited about how powerful this deck is and how well it performed. So I think it's a good thing to share with everyone. I don't think this deck is finished yet. I think there's some fine tuning you can do, but it's a perfect baseline to build upon. So as for the grade 3s, we obviously own 4 copies of Altmile, and I managed to get DSP due to one of my friends. So I'm very happy I can show off the big guy. Like, the zero arts are really pretty, so they really improve my enjoyment of the deck, since I wasn't really a fan of the old art. Then, as for the other grade 3, I'm running Ashley. So she's the backup, right, I suppose, but also she has a perfect rearguard skill, so that means she's also our best multi-attacker. So generally, we always want to ride Altmile, since he is the core focus. And maybe this is already a point at which I can talk a bit about why we run the new G units. So if you haven't noticed, in the history collection set, many of the on-hit strides, or all of the on-hit strides, got errated. And this means we now have a very strong turn 3 play while our opponents are grade 2, and they allow us to stride. So the way they have been changed, so I've got both here, is that they received an act skill which allows you to pseudo stride them on top of your vanguard by paying the cost for stride, which is discarding cards with their grades being equal to 3 or greater. And then if you flip up an old copy or any copy, you just get 2 force markers, which means you get 2 force markers instead of 1, which you would have gotten by riding the V version or like the alternate ride. So this gives you immediately 2 force markers, which is really strong. And then it has the on-hit effect, which used to be on-hit, which is bad, but they fixed it by putting on any of the on-hits of this card activate regardless whether or not the attack hits at the end of battle, kind of, but it's still during on-hit timing. Superior calls a grade 2 or greater from deck. So I think you might already see what the synergy here is, but we'll go over that later where we go through the combos. So Altmile is now our main ride, and we have Ashley as a backup ride. Like, this could be a good second ride to get another force marker, or this is a perfect rearguard for any of your turns. We'll go into grade 2s next, and I have quite a few grade 2s. For Lael, she is one of the best dual knights we have access to. Currently I have 4 Catafal. This should be 1 less when you would be building the deck. 4 Suleiman and 4 Albion. So these 2 are interesting because they're kind of limited to Altmile. This one calls cards that have the Brave ability, which is Suleiman in this case, and he calls any of the grade 2s with a different card name, but you have to be on an Altmile Vanguard, so he only works when your Vanguard is Altmile. And so these 2 kind of can keep calling each other as long as you have the resources for it. So this is Counter Blast 1, discard 1, and this is Counter Blast 1, Soul Blast 1. So this is generally the way you would finish on your second stride turn. Catafal is like Knight of Twin Sword, but without the GB lock, and he also has a second ability that allows you to discard him during right phase and filter for the pieces you actually need during your combos. I do think he is also like one of the cards you want to have on your first grade 3 turn. He's really good at 4, but I'll show you when we go over the grade 1s why this might be the one that you cut for something else. And then obviously for Lael, she's the best target to call with Ashley, and she also gives plus 10k to anything that gets called upon. So if she's on the field and any of these call something to her circle and the circle doesn't have force markers, it still gives plus 10 and it makes sure things can hit. She also recycles your pieces, so on attack you return 2 normal units to the bottom of the deck and Soul Charge. And this means if you see any of these in the early game, you can just put them back and superior call them when you need them. Same with the grade 3s, same with the grade 1s. So that's why she's so good, and she makes it so we never run out of resources. Because she also Soul Charges, so that fixes the cost for Albion and for Ashley. As for the grade 1s, I have 3 copies of Sisylas. One of the alt arts and 2 of the regular ones. The other alt arts are in my V deck, so I didn't take them out for this. Then 4 copies of Eunice, which is probably the best grade 1 Jewel Knight, and then 3 copies of Morvi. So as you noticed, I'm only running 10 grade 1s, and I'm running the Sanctitude obviously. That's also a grade 1, but I can't ride it, so it doesn't really count. One of the issues I had during the Chop Challenge is that I bricked on not finding a grade 1 during my finals game. And this kind of explains it. I only have 10 grade 1s in this deck, and probably need to bump it up. And that's why I would cut one of the grade 2s, probably the Catafal, just to run an extra Morvi, since she's the best one to ride. Or I suppose that Sisylas also works really well, since you need to find your grade 3. But either of them, bumping them up by 1 would probably help a lot in the consistency of the deck. If you don't know what the Jewel Knights do, I might actually go over them. So Eunice has the effect at the end of the battle she boosted, return a normal unit to the bottom of the deck and Soul Charge, and if you do, return her to hand. So she's also another way to get extra soul for your Ashley activations, and she returns other cards to the deck, so you get them into the deck so you can superior call them. She also has a second ability, which all of the Jewel Knights have something when they're overcalled. In her case, it's if there's something in the same column, an opponent's rear card, you can retire, you retire it, and if you can't, you draw a card. So she's very versatile in that and allows you to actually get rid of your opponent's Honolly if they didn't remove it from the game. That's might a good point to talk a bit about Honolly. It might be one of the cards that I would actually put into this deck, but since you can't superior call it, you have to draw into it. It's a bit hard to find room for it. Like currently, the offensive power of most of the decks is pretty high, and having Honolly means you can stop it. You have to find it, and I don't like relying on that luck, but maybe the ideal build would actually run a few copies of it. I just wouldn't know where to fit it, but it's something I really want to add in. Like Honolly is really good right now. Morvi, I actually haven't used her Axe Kill at all. It uses a counterblast to put something back and Soul Charge, and then give plus 5k to one of your Jewel Knights. Since Jewel Knights are generally always on the force markers you generate with your Altmile, they actually already hit for good numbers, so you don't actually need the plus 5, but I suppose that the plus 5 could come up if you have units in the other column and then any grade 2 in front of it, so they make 18k, and then if you activate this you give 5 here, so it's 23, and then it hits over defensive. But I haven't used it at all. The secondary skill is the main reason you like her a lot, is because when there's something placed over her, you just draw a card. So you don't have to think about if there's anything in the same column that can be retired. You can just always overcall her and get draws. So this is one of the ways you actually get advantage during your pressure turns. And then last but not least, the grade 3 Searcher is actually a really good ride, since he gets plus 5k if you don't have face-up damage. So going second, if you ride this, you always swing for 13, which means most of your opponents are just gonna no-guard it. And then, yeah, searching grade 3s is really good, since you need both your Stride bearer, so you need Altmile. You need a card you can discard for Stride cost, since the on-hit Strides actually ask for grade 3s. Well, you can't use you need grades equal to 3. You can't use any of the triggers that count as Stride fodder. And you actually want Ashley on hand to combo further, so you actually need a lot of grade 3s, and that's why Sisylas is definitely one of the better grade 1s to run in this deck. So as for grade 1s, I probably want to bump all of them, but I have to find room to do that. As for triggers, we obviously run 3 Hail Guardians. I don't think you can actually play Vanguard in Premium right now without Hail Guardians. They're just too useful. They make sure that you can survive if your opponent pressures you so hard with their first grade 3 turn. They work as Stride fodder. I suppose the only downside they have is that if you only have this as a grade 3 on hand and you didn't manage to use it in time, you kind of gets to miss right, and it sucks. So, but I don't think you can cut it right now. Then I have the Keter Overtrigger, which actually came up during one of my games. I checked it on my drive check, but since on my first grade 3 turn, but since this superior calls a grade 3 from deck, a grade 2 or greater, so I superior called a grade 3, and so that thing got twin drive, then it superior called a grade 2, another drive, and that way I actually got a lot of advantage. Even though normally this deck doesn't draw all that much, I managed to end with a 14 card hand, which was pretty insane. I then run 3 copies of the draw PG. PGs are super important, so there's no reason to not run them. Then this is the errated version of the old Altmile crit, and this is a copy of the old one, so this one still has the old power, but it has been errated to being 15k shield and 10k triggers. So this means they're actually really good right now. They also have a new effect. When they're revealed for the damage check, you draw a card. So this also means that you actually have a defensive draw trigger, and actually kind of run 7 draws, or 8 if you count the over trigger. The first effect, to put them into soul for plus 5k and a draw, I haven't used that, but it's actually relevant since you still need soul for your Ashleys. And if you didn't manage to build enough soul for doing consecutive Ashleys, then this might come up. It didn't for me, but it's really, there's no reason to not run this anymore. And then obviously 4 of the stride crit. This is mainly for your real stride turns. You can't use this when you go into the on-hit strides, but you need as many ways to stride, and since you don't really want to throw away your grade 3s, this is probably the best way to go. So that's actually all of the main deck. I still have my starter. I just went for Ambrosius because he looks kind of cool, and my Altmile starter, Iliad, is still in my V deck, so I managed to get a use for him. And most of my opponents didn't know what clan this card was from until I told them, so this was kind of funny. Then for the extra deck, so before I go into it, I want to say that I think this is the G-Zone itself has the most room to change. I run some cards at many copies, and believe I should lower them to have more versatility. But at the end of the day, there's actually only 3 strides that kind of matter, and the rest are more flex. So I've decided to go for 4 copies of Gablade. So Gablade is the new stride, well, the old stride, but it's the one that got errated, and he's probably your most important stride, since you almost always want to go into him first, since you get the 2 force markers. And having those 2 force markers is super good, since you're a multi-attack deck, you do a lot of attacks on the same circle. Having 2 force markers on one circle means everything swings for 30, 28 or 33. Also, he has no costs, which means all of your CB you have can be used just to multi-attack. It's not linked to your Vanguard skill, and so that means you can get more pressure out of it than you would if you have to pay CB and don't have any way to extend anymore. So that's why he's so good. I would probably run him at 3, since it's only the first time you activate him that you have to flip something. So if the second time you stride him, you really just don't have to do anything else. So that's why this copy is actually a bit too much. But it felt safe to just run him at many copies if people started damage denying, because I didn't really know if that's the way people would be playing right now. But we'll go over this one last. Then I have 3 copies of Crystal Luster. I think Crystal Luster is still really good, since this always puts you at GB2, so this, once you strike this, you're at GB3, and the guard restrict is active. The only issue is that if you copy Altmile's skill, you really don't get much value. What his skill is, continuous GB2, during your turn all of your front rows get +5. So if you stride upon him and you copy his skill, you're like, sure, my grade 2s are 15Ks, and well, they're probably on force markers here, so they make some decent numbers, and definitely this column finally gets the hit without needing a booster, but it feels a bit lackluster. Obviously, due to the guard restrict, if you know your opponent wouldn't survive if they have to guard everything you can throw at them, then this is probably the most guarantee you can, the biggest way to guarantee a kill. Doesn't feel that great. On the other hand, if you rewrite into Ashley, you actually get her skill, and she says, at the end of the battle she attacks Soul Blast 2, a superior called 2 Jewel Knights, which means oh, if she's on rear, it's 1. If she's on Vanguard, it's 2. So this way she's on Vanguard. And that means you get 2 more attacks, which means you go to 5 unless you have something on rear that also called something else. So this feels better than this did. And she also has the effect, if something is placed on top of her, +1 and give yourself a crit. So even if you stride, that skill goes off and the Vanguard would get a crit, which is scary. Since they're always gonna want to PG your Crystal Luster, and then they'll have to throw 3 cards unless they have the order. That's why Crystal Luster is so good. He felt like the main finisher for the deck, but I probably would also just get rid of one of the copies for something else. Then the Knight of Twin Swords, and I think that's one of the most important ones. So this is the other finisher for the deck. If you manage to G-guard, this guy always feels a little bit better than Crystal Luster, but Crystal Luster doesn't necessarily need CB. So this is possible to do a big turn without CB if you ride into Ashley, since neither of them have a CB cost, so you still have a finisher turn without CB. This is if you have CB, but if you don't have pieces to multi-attack. So his effect is, when he attacks while boosted, counterblast 1, flip a card in your G-zone face up, and search your deck for up to 2 grade 2s or less. No, specifically grade 2s, and call them to rear, and then shuffle your deck. At first that doesn't seem too strong, but then his second effect says, every rearguard placed from deck gets +5 for every face-up card in your G-zone. So you'll always be at 2 from riding this, and then let's say you randomly G-guard it, and then he flips something. You're at 4 face-up cards in the G-zone. Everything that is called from the deck gets +20. Which means that if she's called to this circle, and this doesn't even have force markers, this is a 30k attacker now, on effect 35k. Like if you can do a couple attacks like that and your opponent's at 4 or 5, you're likely to kill them. So he's in like the same boat as Crystal Luster, but there's a different situation in which he's good. So I personally would probably go like this and make it so there's two Twin Swords and 2 Crystal Lusters. But for the shop challenge, I did actually go for 3 Crystal Lusters. We haven't talked about him, the Divine Knight of Triumphs. So I don't really like him, but he's specifically here to face Gridora. So what he says is, when he attacks, counterblast 1, flip up a card from your G-zone, draw the same number of cards as the number of rear cards, and then choose the same number of cards from hand as the number of cards drawn and call them to rear. If you have 5 or more rear cards, you get a force. This allows you to multi-attack without having to call things from deck, which all of the other strides kind of do. They call stuff from deck. Well, I guess this doesn't, but you rely on superior calling from deck, and this allows you to call from hand, which means you still have enough pressure to push your opponent while you're under the Gridora skill, which doesn't allow you to superior call from the deck. As for G cards, I went for 2 Morgaus. She's the latest one we got. She says, choose one of your rear guards, grade 2 units, and it gets +10, and the ability, if it intercepts, counterblast Soul Blast, and it becomes PG. So she herself is a 15k shield, but it's interesting, if 15k is enough to stop one of the attacks, and you can put the effect on another rearguard, you threaten your opponent to actually start swinging on the rearguard instead of on your Vanguard, because they're like, oh, it's an intercept as a PG. But sometimes that kind of just works, because you take up a bit of pressure off your Vanguard, and that means she worked as a good shield value. So she's probably one of my favorite G cards currently in Royals, since it threatens your opponent that you're gonna PG them. You don't always have to do it, but like the idea that there's something there that can PG throws them off. So I like her a lot, even though she doesn't get extra shield value. We then have the dog. The dog is GP1. You can flip a G unit face up, and if there is a rearguard in your front row, you get +10k. So it's 25. It's good. If you need the shield value, it's good. Then we have Laser Guard. Laser Guard says, if you have 1 or more grade 2s, this gets +5. This is bad, but it is not GB locked, so I suppose there's a situation in which this is better than this, and it's 20k shield. So since we can always brick and not go into the blade and just have to ride Ashley and sit there like, ugh, this game is gonna suck, then this could come up. And then I have 2 copies of Ingrain, and she's actually interesting. If you're in Brave, she gets +5k shield, so she becomes a 20k shield. But Brave means you have 3 or less cards on hand, so You must be losing for that to be active. And then secondly, if she's placed on the Guardian Circle, if you're on a Vanguard with Altmile, you can pay a Soul Blast and it gets plus 10. So this becomes 25k shield, kind of like Mescal. But if you're on Altmile, and since Soul isn't an issue due to the Jewel Knight engine, this is probably the easiest way to get a good amount of shield values. Since she can become 30 if you're in Brave as well. So then last but not least, Harmonix Messiah. This card is mandatory in every G-Zone for now until the foreseeable future. So I do not have the new copy. I had a friend borrow me his old version, the promo. So, but this card really kind of changes the way you play going second. So if you go second, you can reveal it and get a Guardian ticket. And the Guardian ticket is 20k shield. And that 20k shield is super important because it's one of the few ways you can actually survive some of these pressure turns the on-hit strides do. But if you don't need it to survive, you can discard it for searches, you can discard it for PGs. It's just that extra card you get on hand and means you have so much more survivability. So I hate to say it, but without Harmonix, I don't think many of the decks are actually viable or have enough shield value to survive until their one stride turns. So I hope Bushua decides to reprint this in a new set, in a promo, has another way to distribute it to us so everybody has access to it and we don't have to rely on being lucky that friends have copies or that we pull them from boxes. Since the card itself, I believe, like the actual errated one, is going for 80 euros, I think. So that's quite much as an entry price to get into premium. And that's not even talking about the rest of the G-Zone or the main deck. So this is my G-Zone. The small changes I would make are Twin Sword and maybe an extra Yulo just for in case I run into Gridora, because apparently the deck is still quite threatening and if you run into it, you kind of want to have an out for it. So that was the deck. I guess I'll go now into a combo turn or like the first grade 3 turn as to what my plan is for that turn and then go into the plan for the turns after. So for the combo turn, I set up a little bit of a soul, so we're grade 0, 1, 2, and then we rode into Altmile. What we would do first is pay the cost for a stride, so we'll discard an extra copy of Altmile in this case, and we stride with the act skill. So since we're on Altmile, we don't have a face-off imaginary gift, we can discard cards with grade 3 or greater, so this is the case, and then we stride this on Vanguard from face down. Then we can decide to flip a copy of Giblade face up, which is a card with the same card name, and get ourselves force markers. Give me a second on those. I definitely did not forget to put those aside. So we get 2 force markers and we decide to put them on the same circle. So then we could activate our Altmile's stride skill, but actually I'm gonna act like I don't have, well, I guess I do want a single CB, so let's say this went to damage. But his stride skill is actually not that great, so he says counterblast 1, choose 2 cards from hand and call them to rear guards and they get +5. It's not relevant enough, it doesn't do enough for us, so I'll decide to not activate it. We then call from our hands a copy of Pure Heart Jewel Knight Ashley, Catafall, Sisylas, and Eunice. In this particular order. Like, this is the ideal grade 3 turn, I think. This gives you the most pressure while your opponent is still at grade 2. So how you would proceed, you'd swing first with Ashley. So this is 33k, since there's 2 force markers. And at the end of the battle she attacks, you can pay the cost. We Soul Blast 2. And we get to Superior Call a Jewel Knight from our deck. So specifically in this case, we have to go check like how much soul do we have left. And as we notice, we have a single soul left, which means we can't activate another Ashley. But we're lucky, we have Eunice, so we have a way to actually soul charge. If we did not have Eunice in this case, we'd go into Lil, but since we have her, we go into Morvi. So we Superior Call Morvi with the effect of Ashley, We do not activate her effect to give it a critical trigger crit, because it's not important. We then swing with Morvi for 28 this becomes, because 2 force markers. And then at the end of that battle, we go with our Vanguard swing. So the Vanguard swings for 26 plus 8, which puts us at 34. We perform our triple drive, and we'll go something like... I suppose we could literally check one trigger, because that's nice. So we triple drive and we get a critical trigger, which means we can put some power on this column and make sure it hits. They probably PG'd our Vanguard, so we can also put the critical trigger then on that column, and everything goes to our hands. At the end of that battle, during the on-hit step, his effect activates and he can call a grade 2 or greater, so we're now allowed to superior call Ashley, and we overcall Morvi, which means Morvi activates and draws us another card. Then obviously we still have the skill of units to resolve. At the end of the battle she boosted, we put a normal unit on the bottom of the deck. In this case we'll probably put Morvi back or Ashley, depending on how many we've seen already. I'll go for Morvi. We put it on the bottom and we'll soul charge. And then she bounces to hand. Can now attack again with Ashley, still 33. End of the battle she attacked, Soul Blast 2. And we get the superior call. Now if our opponent hasn't seen defensives yet, or has only seen a single defensive, we'll probably decide to go into Morvi again. If they have seen defensives, Lael is probably the better one since she can swing for 35. This would only be 28. But this is the preferred way for me to go if it's possible. So we go into Morvi. Morvi swings for 28. And then we attack with this column. On attack when boosted, we can counterblast 1, superior call a grade 2 from deck. And since we don't have any other CB, we will go into Lael. If we did have more CB, we could actually go into something like Albion, or I suppose we could also go into Suleiman. I guess in this case you would go Suleiman since there's no soul left, but if you did have soul because you went Lael, you can actually go into Albion, and Albion could call Suleiman to the other front row. It's all based on how many defenses your opponent has seen and how much CB you have, but in this case Lael does seem like the better choice. So overcall Morvi. Morvi's effect activates, we draw another card, and since we now don't have face-up CB, this booster actually gets plus 5k, so this is 13 plus 20 is 33. And then for our final swing we go Lael, and Lael then returns 2 normal units to the deck. So in this case I'll probably go for an Ashley and a Morvi. Both go to the bottom and we soul charge 1. So we have a soul again, and then she gets a plus 5, which means she's 35k. And then our turn ends. We destride, and we actually did a lot of pressure, and we went 3 drive checks and got a bounce, because this was, or oh no, it's not this one. Our units bounced, and then we got 2 draws from doing the combo play. So if you went first, you actually have a pretty healthy hand. After all of this, you have 2 intercepts, and this assumes we committed 4 cards, I think, from hand. We discard for the stride. But if you did it with less, then you obviously end with more cards. So I think this by itself is probably a pretty amazing first grade 3 turn, and I have had test games against friends of mine who just ended up with 1 or 2 cards in hand, and like maybe they still had a grade 3, but they never could pay stride cost, so they were like, yeah, okay, this is a lost game, next one. So the pressure from the 2 force markers and being able to call so many attacks to that single force marker is so big that this could by itself win you the game. But if it doesn't, let's say everything is cleared, we go into our second stride. Alright, as for our second stride turn, we have a couple of options. So I might have been over this early in the video, but we can go either into Blade, Crystal Luster Dragon, or Knight of Twin Swords, depending on what our opponent has done. Obviously, Yulo is also an option, but he's mainly to use against Redora, so I'm not gonna put him in this part of the video. going over these three, I think the easiest one to talk about is Gablade. Gablade is the stride we go into if our opponent totally damage denies us and we don't really have a way to abuse Crystal Luster. So the one thing we have to account for with Gablade is that generally we're going to call a grade 3 from deck, which is Ashley. And Ashley needs 2 soul. So if we base it over last turn, we only will have 1 soul left. So we'll have to find a way to actually get the soul for Ashley. So we either need to have a copy of Lil still on hand or on the field, because it was there from last turn and we didn't intercept with it, or a copy of Eunice, which then can bounce and soul charge. So we get the soul we need for Ashley. If we have Ashley on hand, we would be able to just call Ashley also to the front row, and then with the on-hit skill, we'd call Lil. And with Lil's effect, you'd on-attack soul charge, so the Ashley would be able to proc and superior call another copy of Lil over her. So that way we still get 4 attacks, we didn't use any CP, and it's a decent turn if your opponent decides you didn't get any CP this turn. So it's something we can do, but it's probably not our strongest turn. Next up, we still have 2 choices. So I'll go over Crystal Luster first, since he also doesn't cost any CP. So he could be quite interesting, but he does need a bit of a setup, otherwise you'll only do 3 attacks, since if he copies Altmile skill, you don't really get any kind of plussing to the field, so it's just the 3 attacks, and that might not be enough to kill, or might not be good enough even to kill your opponent. So one of the ways to really abuse Crystal Luster is by rewriting into Ashley, and I'll go over this one first. So because we rewrite, we get another force marker. Let's see where it is. Here's my force marker. So I would put it on the other circle. We then pay the cost to stride. Well, I'm gonna assume we had a different Ashley as well. So pay the cost for stride. And then ideally we have some cards on hand that allow us to multi-attack. So actually, instead of paying the cost by discarding the Ashley, we'd probably discard either of these, since they only work while you're on an Altmile Vanguard. So these 2 are probably most important when you go into Twin Sword. So with this basic setup, we now have 3 front rows that are grade 2 or greater, which means the GB3 skill of Holy Dragon Crystal Luster is active, since we also have 2 face-up cards here. And then by activating its act skill, we could flip a card from our G-Zone face-up. So assuming we don't have a single CB, this can be literally any grade 2, but if we had a bunch of CB, it's not like we can use too much, since only Cut Off All could extend, and I suppose if we summon Albion, he could also extend one more time, so that's probably a thing we could do. One of the things we have to note is the when placed upon skill. So when you stride, it goes off, and you can pay a single counterblast to give a critical to your Vanguard, which might actually end up being important. Alright, so then for the attack order, you'd go Ashley, and since we rewrote, since we're now on Ashley, we actually have 2 soul, so we can pay a Soul Blast and Superior Call a copy of Lil from the deck. Why Lil? Since we're still having 3 grade 2 or graders. If for some reason you have trouble getting that kind of setup, or keeping that setup, since you don't have enough Jewel Knights, you could always call just 1 to the back row to always keep 3, and then this could become a grade 1 and still works. So right, then we'll go Lil. Lil will put back pieces into the deck, gives us a soul charge. We'll then go, we'll go Catapult, boosted. By paying the cost, we counterblast 1. We'll be able to Superior Call, and I guess I'll need a copy of Albion in this case. So why Albion specifically? Since he's not restricted to Altmile, the only restriction he has is that he Superior Calls a unit with the Brave ability, and that he costs a Soul Blast. So because she was now overcalled, he also gets +10, so that's actually a really good number, that's 39. And your opponent still has to guard with 3 cards, so you'll go here, you Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, and you'll be able to Superior Call a grade 2 with the Brave ability. So that goes to here. And I noticed that I went a bit hard on the soul blasting and didn't realize I kind of needed a bit of the ability to soul charge. So you kind of have to keep track of your soul usage, since this still needs 2 soul to superior call. So I maybe should have called these 2 if I had those in hand, or like extended less by using the other skills and focused more on the Ashley skill itself. But like this would be another 19, and since we're yeah, no, so all of the skills on this card are all more restricted, so you can't use them. So this is 19, and like assume this would have boosted, we would have had 1 soul, and then if this one boosts, at the end of that battle we can activate her effect, she bounces, she protects something, we soul charge, and then we still have the requirement, so we can soul blast 2 and superior call 2 great 2s from the deck. So we superior call a Leo and another Leo, since those give the best numbers. And by doing that we have a bunch of attacks that actually have guard restrict on them, which is really strong, but like you have to keep track of your soul to be able to do this. And so with the setup I created earlier, this wouldn't work, since we really didn't have enough soul unless we had 2 units in hand that could actually extend our soul. So you have to be really safe with it, and like probably you should have called a Leo from the Catapult, so you get more value out of that. So that's it for the Crystal Luster turn. Generally this is gonna kill if you can do enough attacks, since they have to guard everything with 3 cards, and like even if they had a big hand size, at some point it just runs out, and that's really strong. But if you do not have all of these extenders, not all of these tools, and you don't even have a rewrite to actually go back to the start, I'll put a single card in the soul again. Right, so this is likely to be here, since we had it from last turn. The others probably have intercepted, and this time we'll stride into the Knight of Twin Sword. So for Knight of Twin Sword, you generally just want to stay on your Altmile, which is the easiest way to go about it. So let's say we pay the cost for stride and we go into him. So we only have our 2 forest markers. If we had rewritten, we would have had a different, we would have had an extra force marker, and that would have helped doing multi-attack. But obviously that still means we don't have access to these 2, so it makes it harder for us to get a lot of advantage or a lot of attacks out of it. I'll add something further. So these 2 were flipped last turn, but let's say we G-guard it. If we use Mass Call, we can flip another G-guard, so maybe Ingrain, or like we've G-guarded twice. We'll have 4 face-up cards in our G-zone. And this is relevant because of the second effect of Knight of Twin Sword. So right, let's build a field. We didn't rewrite, so we don't have a lot of soul. How can we do this ideally? Thinking any amount of these cards does help in achieving a good number of attacks. Obviously, we should not forget that he also needs a booster, so I'm gonna get this out of the deck as well. I think one of the better ways to go about it would be like this, and yeah, you need a booster. So if you have an extra copy of Eunice, that's probably nicer, since that still works. It also works if you have a lot of CB, because she can counter charge during the main phase, soul charge during the main phase. But yeah, let's assume we got a lot of damage, and based on that damage we can just do a bunch of multi-attacks. So yeah, kind of like this field, the way this looks. And so yes, we would be able to use this counter blast to get ourselves the soul, but we can also just use it to get extra attacks. And I think, yeah, we should be fine. So I'll go over Knight of Twin Sword's effect real quick. So when he attacks while boosted, you counterblast 1, and you superior call 2 Grey 2s from your deck. So you can call them to both front row circles and have a new front row. And then he says, when a rearguard is placed from deck, the unit gets +5 for every face-up card in the G zone. So the nice thing is he flips one with his first skill, and because we set with G-guarded, we get actually another plus 10. So this is 20 by itself. The extra flip would put us at 25 to every card superior called from the deck. So that's kind of his win con. So let's get into the battle. We go first with this column, and it's important that we have a way to soul charge, so we boost with Eunice. And so this is 21, 31, 41. At the end of that battle, her effect activates, we bot tech a normal unit, and we would soul charge. And then she bounces to the hand, and the effect of Ashley activates, and we soul blast 2. And she overcalls herself with a card from the deck. And in this case, we would go for Lil, obviously. We have then, because Lil was called from the deck, she gets the bonus power, and currently that's plus 20. So this Lil is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 55, and she puts 2 normal units back on the bottom of the deck, and soul charges 1. So that's that, and we can swing with this column. Cataval needs to be boosted, so we have to boost. When he's boosted, we counterblast 1. He superior calls something from deck, and I think actually considering just going another Lil, since Scene of Twin Swords will be superior calling 2 things anyway. We'll have a lot of access to multi-attack after the Vanguard swing. So here comes the Lil superior calls itself, and since it's summoned from the deck, it still gets a plus 20. This column did not get any bonus power since it wasn't called from the deck, so it's only 18, and that might just not be enough. But at least it's an attempt to swing. Like, maybe there was some reason to just swap some of the Jewel Knights and do it differently, but like, if it hits, it's nice. If it doesn't, well, so be it. Like, it made another great attack. So then, like, if you really had to, since he's not restricted to calling to a different circle, you could overcall him with a Lil. If that really matters, then you would have had an extra Lil here. And if you know, when Lil's overcall, she actually gives plus 10 to a unit, so this one actually has another 10 on it. But if it would have been here, that meant that both units called from this effect would have gotten plus 10. So that's, if this doesn't hit, you just call Lil over itself, and then you have that ready for next turn, for next attack after the Vanguard. Right, so then this Lil swings. You put back your normal units. Well, obviously you would have had more normal units in your drop since it's the second turn already, so they both go to the bottom. Soul charge, and she gets another plus 5, so this one would have actually been 65. Then the Vanguard swings, and the Vanguard says, on attack when boosted, counterblast 1, superior call 2. And so now we will decide to superior call. Let's see, this one gave bonus power, so this is nice. It would be something like this. So Suleiman overcalls the Ashley, so he gets plus 10 from Ashley. We obviously flip for this effect, so let's say we flip Crystal Luster, so we're now at 5 face-up cards. So that's plus 25 here. And this gets overcalled, gets no bonus effects, but also, let's see, plus 25 here. And then we do a triple drive. Let's say it's all blanks, so it doesn't really matter. We can then go Lil. Lil obviously puts stuff back again. We soul charge. She gets another plus 5 by her own effect. So this one is 40. Then we go here. When this one attacks and you're on Altmile Vanguard, you can counterblast 1, discard 1, so you can discard the units we had, and superior call a unit with the brief ability from the deck. So we would superior call Albion, and Albion would get plus 10 from the Lil, and by the effect of the Suleiman, he also gets another plus 2, but that's a small 2, so I'm actually gonna use this dice. But it might be relevant since opponents are going to be 11k base, so this extra plus 2 makes he's also 11 KBs. And then 25 from being called from the deck. Right, so this one was 35, 45, 55, 64, right? Then this one can swing. Obviously he does the same thing. He counterblasts one, he soul blasts one, and he superior calls from the deck, and he will superior call another copy of Suleiman. And obviously that Suleiman also gets the plus 25, right? And if you were in Brave for some reason, this also gets an on-hit skill that if it hits, it bounces to hand. But this one is now 30, 35, 44, 46, pretty good number. And then this would be our final swing for 45, 54. So as you can see, Twin Sword is actually a really good finisher. Definitely if you have a way to multi-attack before, and like he makes the multi-attack after, and that's why these two are in the deck, since they work so well with his skill. And if you don't have that, and if you have to play around Ashleep in your Vanguard, Crystal Luster is also a great way to go. So I hope you liked the deck profile. I hope it gave you some insight in how I played my Altmile list and how I build it. There's obviously room to improve. There's different ways you can go about it. This one tries to play on a lot of pressure, and that's kind of how I enjoy playing it. I also enjoy that we have the V version of Twin Sword now, and it works so well with this list. So yeah, I hope you learned something. I hope it was exciting, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!